On this edition of Independent Sources, From the Community to the Capital, an effort to swell the ranks of immigrant political leaders through training.
Salty Dog Blues, the story of merchant marines of color in their fight for equality.
And Stop Telling Us to Smile, an artist embarks on a campaign to end the street harassment of women.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. Immigrant leaders are always stressing that the only way to be truly heard is by getting involved in the country's political process. Now, one woman has started an organization that hopes to help immigrants do just that.
Sayu Bourjwani was New York City's first Commissioner of Immigrant Affairs under Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Now she's heading up the New American Leaders Project.
I spoke with Bourjwani about who the program is targeting and her hopes for its future. Sayu, before we discuss your organization, I'd like to start with your incredibly poignant personal journey from being an undocumented immigrant to New York City's first immigration commissioner. Tell us about your personal story.
Sure. I actually came to the United States first to live as a college student, although I had been back and forth to the U.S. many times from Belize, which is where I grew up. And, you know, I think part of the story is how complex the immigration system is and how non-linear so many of our stories are. I was born in India. I grew up in Belize. I had come back and forth to the United States. I had lived here as an international student and then on an H-1B visa. And then when I returned to the U.S., I returned on a transit visa, which I overstayed briefly before I went on to get status through professional and personal decisions. And I shared that story recently because it's part of a journey that many undocumented immigrants like myself have shared. You know, in my case, I think it's important to share it to remind folks that that the face of the undocumented immigrant can look can have many different perspectives and can come from many different journeys. And that most importantly, that being undocumented is not an indication of what kind of person you are or what you can contribute to our society.
In 2010, you've decided to create this nonprofit organization called New American Leaders Project. Tell us about your motivation to reach out to first and second generation immigrants and support them in trying to participate in civic leadership.
Sure. So you know, this has become my most recent passion. It's part of that journey of an immigrant as well. Having run a nonprofit and having worked in government, I came to understand that one of the most effective ways that we as immigrant leaders can have an impact on our communities is by creating policy. And so in 2010, I started this organization as a way of engaging people like myself, people who have come to this country either on their own or with their parents, who have seen the challenges that immigrants face in accessing education and healthcare, in opening small businesses, in getting jobs, to help them understand the ways that they can make policy for our country to affect those communities. And so the way that our organization works is we recruit people who, not just people who are immigrants by birth or by background, but people who have already contributed to their communities and understand what those communities need and understand how to take those needs and transform them into policy responses that will create a better America for immigrants and for all Americans.
And you offer a training program. Describe this program.
Sure. So this is a program that we designed. I say it's a curriculum for immigrants by immigrants, and we use sort of standard skills that candidates need to have: writing a stump speech, responding to questions by the media, fundraising, building your base, and apply an immigrant lens to it. So we talk about how your immigrant story is a powerful asset, and that you can talk about your story in a values-based framework that allows you to connect with other Americans. We talk about how you can fundraise within your community, and that people might not be able to give hundreds and thousands of dollars, but they can give $10 and $20, and they can become, for the first time, they can become political donors. They can become participants in the democracy in a way that they have not been, because the person who's asking them is a leader from within their community. And we talk about how that voter base is a base that you can tap into as an immigrant leader that perhaps another candidate would not be able to tap into. So your community will include first-time voters, or what we call low propensity voters, people who don't vote in primaries or in general election or in local elections. But because I, as a South Asian or as a Russian American or an Asian American or a Latino, is asking for my community's support, there's a greater likelihood that they might get engaged.
How many immigrants have you trained so far?
We've trained over 200 in 9 cities across the United States, people who are first generation, second generation, third generation, from Mexico and Colombia and India and Pakistan and Yemen. It's a wide range of ethnicities, and they're united in both their commitment to American democracy and to the political process, as well as their immigrant heritage and their desire to make this country work better for all Americans.
Do you follow up on where your training is leading these immigrants?
Absolutely. We have an Alumni Support program. We offer a series of webinars. Of the 200 plus people who we've trained in the last 18 months, I believe it's 25 people have run for office. Some of them have won, are in school board, mostly in school board, or district leaders in other parts of the country. And so we hope that they're going to continue to go on, and that the people who ran and didn't win will run again, because most people don't win their first election.
Is there a particular age group that you are targeting?
The average age of our participants is 31. We do tend to have a lot of people in their 20s and early 30s, but we don't target younger folks. That's just who comes to the program.
In closing, I'd like to go full circle and end by asking, how does it feel for you personally to be able to inspire immigrants and be a role model for successful civic leadership?
I think that for me, this work is one step further in the process of really becoming, having access to everything that America has to offer. That it's one thing to achieve economic success, but it's really a very different thing to achieve political power. So I'm happy to be facilitating that for so many people. I'm really looking forward to seeing one of our alumni in Congress in 5 years, and I think that's when I'm going to really feel a great sense of satisfaction that we've built that pipeline all the way up to the highest halls of power in our country, and that there's nothing that is not accessible anymore.
Sayu Bojwani, thank you so much for being in studio with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come on the show, merchant marines of color fight for equal rights and benefits.
Before that, Sarah Pizon has some other news.
Thanks, Vianara. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. From Philam, more than 50 Asian American groups are upset that very few candidates attended the latest mayoral forum for Asians. Out of the 7 mayoral hopefuls who had confirmed attendance, only 4 actually showed up. The attendees included John C. Liu, Saul Albanese, Bill de Blasio, and Eric Salgado. Linda Lee, the executive director of the Korean Community Services of Metropolitan New York, Inc., said that the community members were robbed of the opportunity to have their voices and concerns heard. Other community organizers said the no-show candidates are disregarding an important part of the New York's immigrant community. The Asian Pacific American population makes up nearly 14% of New Yorkers. From El Diario La Prensa, the Bronx has the highest number of homeless shelters, according to a report from the Office of the New York City Comptroller. The analysis highlights that out of the 370 homeless shelters throughout New York City, nearly half of them are located in the Bronx. The report says the Department of Homeless Services has failed to follow the uniform land use review procedures, which would have better dispersed homeless shelters throughout the 5 boroughs. City Comptroller John C. Liu says the concentration of shelters in low-income areas permanently condemns that neighborhood to poverty. From the local cafe to high-end eateries, many New York restaurants are heavily run by low-paid servers, cooks, and busboys. A podcast by Feet in Two Worlds reports that the majority of these restaurant workers, many of whom are immigrants, are fighting to survive on poverty-level wages. Julia Hetich discusses a recent study by the Restaurant Opportunity Centers that shows that 80% of workers earn low wages and 60% make poverty wages. Only a small number of New York City restaurants have agreed to become high-road restaurants. This means they guarantee higher wages and other worker benefits. From the Brooklyn Inc., 2 elementary charter schools in Brooklyn are in high demand for their unusual dual immersion programs. The Hellenic Classical Charter School in the South Slope offers courses in Greek and Latin, while the Hebrew Language Academy of Midwood offers classes in Hebrew. The schools don't target Jewish or Greek families. Instead, the majority of students come from diverse ethnic backgrounds. Both schools receive over 500 applications each year for a little more than 50 open kindergarten seats. And finally, from the Hunts Point Express, 3 Bronxite food activists, Tanya Fields, Jalal Sabur, and Ben Schwartz, are teaming up to deliver residents of the South Bronx a healthy meal alternative. Starting in July, a school bus will be transformed into a mobile market, delivering fresh food for sale from local growers. It will also offer cooking demonstrations. The founders say the initiative is meant to teach the community about a healthier way of eating, as well as sharing recipes between the diverse immigrant communities. Those were just a few stories from the ethnic and community media.
What started out as a way to honor a father later turned into a documentary about some of the discrimination and other hardships faced by merchant marines of color in the U.S.
The film Salty Dog Blues is produced by Denise Belen Santiago and Alfred J. Santana and covers a span of nearly 40 years.
Before we go to my interview with Alfred J. Santana, let's take a look at a few scenes from the film.
If you was Italian, you worked for the Department of Sanitation. If you was Irish, you became a New York City policeman. Those were the avenues that opened to you. Hispanics and blacks at that particular time had very limited opportunity to become either one of those occupations. So you did what you had to do to survive. And going to sea was one of them.
I had fallen in love with a movie I'd seen called The Hairy Ape with William Bendix. And he was a stoker. A stoker is a guy who puts the coal into the furnace.
A mí me había dicho mi hermano Ramón, que en paz descanse, que estuvo trabajando en un barco que se llamaba el Cuamo. Entonces me decía, cuando yo estaba enfermo, vino enfermo y estuve enfermo en casa, y me decía, cuando yo me cure te voy a llevar a Nueva York porque tú eres buena para marinera.
I was born in Paramaribo, Suriname, formerly Dutch Guiana. I came to the United States during World War II after being torpedoed on a Dutch ship.
My name is Charles Arnold Mills, born Galveston, Texas, June 18, 1920. I was a member of the NMU from May 1937, became a charter member until I retired in 1989.
Al, I had a chance to look at the trailer of the film. Really well done, interesting topic. Before we get into the discussion about the film, Tell us exactly what's a merchant marine and what does a merchant marine does?
Well, a merchant marine, basically, during the time that they were formed in 1937 and actually before, they were basically people who brought supplies back and forth, you know, via the ship routes around the world, and they basically brought supplies all over the world. So in time of war, they brought supplies to the European theater, to the Asian theater, where the war was going place, and they provided supplies for the troops. They didn't basically have any armament or anything like that. They were just basically doing that kind of work. In time of peace, they basically sailed the ships. All the cruise ships that you see now, these are the people who basically man the ships and control the ships and so forth. And so you have people who work above deck, below deck, and actually people who are the captains.
They're not members of the military, are they?
No, they're not members of the military. And even during the time of World War II, they were not members of the military. And that's like a sort of a rub that went on, because even during the time of war, they weren't allowed to have veterans benefits for many, many years. It wasn't until like 1992, or even I think a little bit later than that, that they were actually able to get veteran status. So it was 40-something years later when they were able to get veteran status.
Why this film?
Well, this is actually the brainchild of my producing partner, who unfortunately could not be here today. Her name is Denise Belen Santiago, Dr. Denise Belen Santiago. She's a professor at Pace University, and her father is a merchant marine. And she had heard stories all her life about growing up, and and what it was like for to be the daughter of a merchant marine. Heard stories of his travels and his exploits all over the world. And so she tried to do some research on Puerto Rican merchant marines. And to her surprise, she found that there was no information. Basically, it was a very, very big gap of information in terms of the history of the merchant seamen, and particularly from Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. So she decided that she wanted to do a project, and at that point it was a oral history project, and I think she developed a grant, and she wrote a grant to the CUNY, I think it was a faculty grant, and she got a small grant to do a sort of an oral history, and she hired with her a photographer, and they went down to Puerto Rico, and they shot photographs of the men and the retirees, and came back and put a narrative together. And I looked at it, and that was around the same time that we had met. And we had met because of another job that was unrelated. And she asked me if I would like to be involved with developing a documentary on this idea. And so, at that point, I didn't know exactly what it entailed. I figured, well, it would be a bunch of talking heads and that kind of thing. But then I went to Puerto Rico with her, mm-hmm. and I met some of these guys, and we started videotaping, and I realized that there was a bigger story here.
And so, cinematographically, how did you take it from sort of like this talking head to a really beautifully filmed documentary?
Yeah, well, we started thinking about all the different elements that it could include, And so what happens is you start off with just talking heads, which are interviews, which basically we structured our narrative for the film based on the interviews, the stories that these guys had to tell. And some of these stories were incredible, and they encompass many things.
Give us one memorable story.
Well, one of the memorable stories was how it sort of dealt with sort of the racist aspects of being in the Merchant Marine at that particular time and being part of a union that was, basically made up of a lot of different groups of people. And so one of the guys tells a story, I think it's her father actually, how when they sailed to India, they used to be very, this is before the union actually formed, they were very frugal with the food. So the sailors, the merchant marines, they would get little bits of foods, and so one time this guy complained about it. Her father complained about the food, and the guy told him, he used an expletive. He says, "You guys have been complaining about food all the time, and I've been giving you've been eating rotten meat from the time you came on, and now all of a sudden you're complaining about it." And he said, "Yeah, they've been eating rotten meat from from the time they went from the United States to India and back, they had been eating rotten meat. So I mean, that's just one of the stories they tell, and you know, but there are many different stories in terms of even like one guy was talking about how they was speaking Spanish on the boat one day, and one of the guys there, I guess he didn't like the fact that Spanish people weren't speaking English. And so they got into a big argument about that, and I guess, again, one of these guys used an expletive, and it infuriated the Puerto Rican man, and so I guess he lost his temper, and he took a plate of cheese and ham and whatever and smacked it into the guy's face. And you know, so these are the stories that they kind of tell about, you know, what happened to them.
You mentioned the union a couple of times. What role did the union play in the lives or the careers of these merchant marines?
Yeah, well, this was a very progressive union at the time that it formed. It was called the National Maritime Union, and the union was formed in 1937, and it was a progressive union made up largely of communists. And one of the men who formed the union was a guy from Jamaica. His name was Ferdinand Smith, and he was actually one of the most powerful black men in the country at the time, because when you're in charge of imports and exports, it's a very powerful position to be in terms of the government. So this is a very progressive union. They were ones who talked about there will be no discrimination, there will be no racism, there will be no sexism. These were part of their platform, their major platform. And so that basically in 1937, that was very, very progressive. And so they were glad to be a part of that union because it was a rival union that was more segregated. Mm-hmm. And so that was a hard deal to work on that side. So when they formed the National Maritime Union, the workers were very happy.
Was there any conflict between the two unions?
Oh yeah, there was always conflict because they're vying for jobs, they're vying for materials, and you know, you have these big ship owners who basically were responsible for hiring the crews, and so they would hire a crew from one union versus another union, and so there was definitely union rivalry at that time, and the history shows it even got violent on a lot of levels back then.
Before we go, where and when can we see this film?
This film actually just premiered. It made its New York premiere at the Workers Unite Film Festival, and it was showing at Cinema Village on the 16th. And we have plans to show it in New York City, to have other screenings around. The only date that we have solid right now is in September 20th, up in the Bronx at the Bronx Heritage Music Center. And so people can keep up with this film and keep up with what we're doing on our Facebook page, which is Salty Dog Blues, the film, or they can check my website, which is alsantana.com, www.alsantana.com, and we will keep updates on what's happening with the film.
All right, well, congratulations and good luck.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And finally, from catcalls to public masturbation, many activists say street harassment has become an epidemic throughout the United States.
One artist is using her skills to speak up for women like her who experience it every day. Abby Shola filed this report.
Tatiana Fazlali-Zadeh began her career as an artist, creating illustrations and paintings that speak to several issues plaguing different communities.
I've touched on topics from gun violence in the Black community and how it affects young Black men, gay rights, things like that. All of things that I feel strongly about, but I don't personally experience myself.
Lately, the Oklahoma City native has become more personal in her work. Her latest project explores a problem she says she and many other women face almost daily: street harassment.
The project is called Stop Telling Women to Smile, and it is about street harassment. I wanted to do something that spoke for myself and other women who experience street harassment and do not like it or appreciate it.
The graduate from Philadelphia's University of the Arts spoke to several women she knows about their experiences being harassed by men spewing catcalls as they walk the streets. Inspired by their stories, she drew their portraits from photographs she took of them, then added captions like, "My name is not baby," and "Women don't owe you their time or conversation." After several months, Fazlalizadeh exhibited her work from the project at a Brooklyn clothing store packed with spectators.
Tonight we're just kind of taking all of the work that's usually outside in the street, and we're just kind of putting it inside. So the posters, we paste posters that will normally be outside. I'm kind of compiling them all just so people kind of see them in one space at one time and experience everything at once.
While there are no laws against verbal street harassment, the issue hasn't gone unnoticed. According to the Centers for Disease Control, non-contact unwanted sexual experiences, including street harassment, are the most prevalent form of sexual violence for both men and women in the United States. Several organizations recently gathered in Washington Square Park for International Anti-Street Harassment Week to raise awareness on and speak out against the problem. There were dance routines, self-defense tutorials,
I began to run and never stopped until I got home.
and storytelling. Organizers say street harassment isn't just a problem, it's an epidemic.
We also see a tremendous amount of street harassment happening to people of color, the LGBTQ community, and people with disabilities. It's really people using their power and exerting it over other people. So it's society's most vulnerable and most at risk who's experiencing it disproportionately.
Though several of these organizations laud people like Fazlalizadeh for her work, she still has to deal with others who don't like her message.
So there's been a ton of support for the project, but there's also been a lot of people who don't support it, who don't agree with it, who don't understand it, which is totally fine. I feel like, as long as people are talking about it, they're talking about the work and they're talking about street harassment and there's some conversation happening, then that's all I can really ask for.
The young artist says she plans to raise funds to expand the project to cities around the world. She's also working on a short film to document her experience. For Independent Sources, Abby Ashola.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.